to the Shop, episode 228, Cracking the Leadership Code with Alain Hunkins. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DiFurio. I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you haven't yet subscribed to the show, please do so. Just hit subscribe wherever you get these podcasts. Share these episodes also if you think of it. Maybe you know a fellow coffee professional that would benefit from the content in these episodes, or you are a manager and you can forward this to your team. We strive to bring you really relevant and actionable content that makes you and your business thrive, you and your coffee shop. So spread the love. That'd be awesome. And if you have the opportunity to do so, if you would rate or review this show on iTunes, that would be awesome as well. Thank you so much for all of that. We have a really great show today on leadership, and I can't wait to bring that content to you today. I want to mention to you also that Keys to the Shop offers consulting to you and your business to help you bring your operations and your business to the next level. And at this time, because COVID is still a thing, unfortunately, and a lot of us are feeling the squeeze, I am offering a very deep discount on my hourly rate for over-the-phone consultation, remote consulting to help you work through problems, gain clarity, or whatever really is on your mind for your career or for your business. If that sounds interesting and you want to set some calls up with Keys to the Shop Consulting, just email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. I'd love to hear from you and talk with you, figure out how Keys to the Shop can help you wherever you happen to be in your business right now. So I look forward to talking to you. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is one of the world's best specialty coffee equipment suppliers, equipping you with everything from espresso machines, brewers, and grinders, to even restaurant equipment like under-counter refrigeration. They curate the best of this equipment from all over the world, and then they fit it perfectly with the needs of their customers, whether that's on a small scale or on a large scale. If you're looking to open a new coffee bar, expand your existing operation, or just upgrade the equipment that you currently have, Prima Coffee is an amazing resource and a great company to partner with as you build that out. Now, when you go to their website, prima-coffee.com, you'll see the amazing selection, but also notice they put a lot of effort into helping you use the equipment well and learn how to make coffee really well too. All of their tutorials, blogs, and videos, they do this because they're all about setting you up for success. So again, go to their website, prima-coffee.com. Reach out to them. Again, that's over at prima-coffee.com. This episode is also brought to you by the amazing Barista series from Pacific. If you're looking for the best plant-based performance beverage out there, then the Barista series is exactly what you need. Developed for professional baristas and with an enormous amount of feedback from the professional barista community, each one of the beverages in the Pacific Barista series line, whether that's oat, soy, hemp, almond, rice, coconut, you're going to find that beverage truly performs on the bar. It stands up to the heat from steaming, produces amazing latte art ready texture, and it also keeps the flavor balance of the final beverage focused on the coffee, which is super important as a coffee shop. You want something like that. So I think you and your customers are really going to love this product. And you should try it in your shop. Go to pacificfoodservice.com to find out more information. Just click the link in the show notes here for this episode and find out for yourself why the Barista series is the preferred choice of professionals all over the world. Go visit them again at pacificfoodservice.com. Okay, well, today we are tackling a very familiar subject, leadership. Leadership is such a big topic, and we cover this topic a lot from lots of different angles, and it's for a good reason, because there's a lot that goes into good leadership, and unfortunately, there's a lot of bad leadership out there, and doubly unfortunately, we've had to work under bad leadership and picked up some of their traits. We're going to talk a lot about that today. We're going to crack the code on what it takes to be a great leader and develop great leadership. And to do that, we're talking with Alain Hunkins, author of the best-selling book, Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. Alain is a sought-after leadership speaker, consultant, trainer, and coach. His book, Cracking the Leadership Code, launched as the #1 best-selling new release in business communications on Amazon. Over his 20-year career, Alain has led over 2,000 groups in 25 countries. Clients include places like Wal-Mart, Pfizer, Citigroup, General Electric, State Farm Insurance, IBM, General Motors, and Microsoft. Alain has designed and facilitated seminars on numerous leadership topics, including team building, conflict management, communications, peak performance, innovation, and change. We know a lot about change right now, especially. Alain also serves on the faculty of Duke Corporate Education and has published over 400 articles on leadership. And in this conversation today, we are diving into a lot of the content of this book, Cracking the Leadership Code, to bring us some best practices for what we can do to bring our leadership game up to the next level at this time in our history of coffee in the cafe as we lead our teams. And most of us, and a lot of us, it's a small team. All eyes are on us. Leadership is one of the most important things that we can focus on right now. And having a good game plan and some targets to shoot for when it comes to our own personal practice of leadership and even helping develop the leadership of our team is really critical. And that's exactly what this conversation is going to break down for you. So I'm really excited to share this with you, and I hope that it really impacts the way that you lead yourself and your team. So without further ado, here now is my conversation with the author of Cracking the Leadership Code, Alain Hunkins. Alain, welcome to the show. Really pleased to have you. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's really a pleasure to be with you today. Thanks.
Yeah, I am. We're chatting a bit before recording, and how of the moment the concept of leadership is, because so much of what we're focused on is, what are we in business for, and what are we doing for our employees and our customers, and it really is a pivotal moment for leadership. And so this topic is so extremely important. So I'm glad to be talking with you. Your book, Cracking the Leadership Code, is widely celebrated, and congratulations on that. I wonder, what was a catalyst for doing a book like this? Because it comes from a lot of years of experience and preparation.
Sure, yeah. The genesis for the book really has come out of a question that I've been pondering for decades, literally decades now, which is, why do people do what they do? And specifically, why do leaders do what they do? I've been fascinated about since I was probably 5 years old, and just my life journey has sort of, it's funny, you look at your life backwards, you see the dots connect, but while you're going forward, it didn't necessarily connect. But what I found was that, I studied in college, I studied psychology, and was really interested in the science and the motivation behind human behavior. And actually, I also got really interested in theater. Actually, I went to graduate school to become a professional actor. I spent 3 years in drama school, where you really literally put yourself under the microscope as an actor to really pick apart human behavior, your voice, your body, how you move, how you speak, all of it in terms of the impact that it creates. And from there, I moved into educational training and consulting, working in junior high schools and high schools in New York City, and then transitioned to working with organizations and businesses. But the common thread has always been, why is it that great leaders seem to have things in common, and why do lousy leaders have things in common as well? And what I noticed, because I started working with group after group, and over the years became hundreds and then thousands of groups, is I started to see patterns, Chris. I saw these patterns of behavior start to emerge, that the great leaders definitely did things in common. And not only did they do things in common, they had certain kind of mindset that they shared. And the mediocre leaders had a similar, different mediocre mindset. And so I would listen to stories, and I'd start writing those stories down, taking notes. And then in 2011, I started blogging and basically turning those stories and notes into blogs. And the blog started to accrue. And a few years later, I had hundreds of blogs. And I started looking back over them and looking for some of the common themes. And that's what originally the content from the book, most of it comes out of those blog posts, looking at what were the main themes. So the subtitle of the book is The 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. And those 3 secrets are connection, communication, and collaboration. So I see that in some ways, those become the heart of what we do as leaders. And when I say leader, by the way, I'm talking about anyone. I'm not talking about just a job title or a position. It's a way of being and a mindset that any time that any of us are trying to influence somebody else to get something done, that's being a leader. And so it's a pretty broad definition.
That's wonderful. It's a long-term scientific study that you've basically taken on by your fascination, and so the content is so rich because of that, because of it's been such a well-researched topic. And broadly speaking, there's I don't know if there's any other category of book that has more written on it, except for food, maybe, than leadership. And yet, our ability to trust the ones that we are under, let's say, as leaders, is not the best for the most part, I would say. Like, we have a lack of confidence in our leaders, and confidence that we do have is really hard fought for. So what gives with that? Why is it that employees have such low confidence in leadership?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, if you look at some of the research I did around this is that, on average, only about 23% of people believe their leaders lead well, and this is from studies that have surveyed over 25,000 people all around the world. So only 23% of us think our leaders lead well. So the fact is, and this has been consistent. So leadership has been mired in mediocrity for quite some time. And I think one of the big reasons is that most leaders are in denial. And the fact is, most of us probably wake up every day and think we're doing a really good job. I can't think of anyone who probably wakes up and thinks, today I'm going to be a lousy communicator. Today, no one on my team is going to trust me, right? People mean well, but unfortunately, their good intentions don't translate into good results. And I think what's interesting is when we look at the feedback of 23%, like on a feedback or evaluation that people fill out, they're anonymous. So since the surveys are confidential, there's no downside to sharing the honest truth. So we get a really clear snapshot of what's working and what's not working. But sadly, I feel like most leaders don't ever ask their own people that they're leading for the same level of candor. And so people are not about to start giving unsolicited feedback because the unspoken truth is there's a power play going on, right, in organizations. And so people know that speaking up and giving some honest feedback could be a career-limiting move. And so what ends up happening is these leadership blind spots just remain invisible. And so we kind of all go along and it's like, you don't call me on my stuff, I won't call you on your stuff. You'll be mediocre. And then when I get a better opportunity, I'll just leave and say it was for something else. So this kind of perpetuates, goes on and on. And I'll give you a great example of just how sometimes these blind spots are institutionalized. So years ago, I was working with a Fortune 100 company. This was a big company. And I was about to meet with the CEO and the executive team. But before I did, one of the senior vice presidents pulled me aside to a little room and he said, look, Alain, these guys, they run this company and they know they run this company. So when you go in there, one word you never use is no. And you can say maybe, you can say possibly, I'll look into it, but you never say no. Then he stopped and he went, do you understand? And then he waited for me to actually give him a verbal yes, as though I was sitting in the exit row of an airplane. It's like literally. And as this is going on, I am thinking, this is crazy. This is insane. They have actually institutionalized this. The emperor has no clothes. And so to me, that's just such a classic, powerful example of the power play that's at work with us and really having these honest conversations with our leaders.
Oh, that's really kind of getting into that idea of the institutional part, the learning by osmosis, just handing down and grandfathering in dysfunction from one leader to the next. And I know I have it and everyone else does. The first person that was your boss, even if you hated them, you're going to have some of their leadership style rub off on you. And for lack of other input, you just lean on the most available example of what is done just out of sheer safety for your position and self-preservation, but not the advancement of leadership as we're talking about here. And I love the story in the book about the cutting the end off the roast of the I forget what it was that was being cooked, but it was everyone thought that there was. Tell us a little bit about that. That was very interesting. Also,
Sure, yeah. This is a kind of an old parable called the holiday roast. So the story goes, there's this young woman, and she's making her family's traditional holiday roast for the first time. And so she gets out the handwritten recipe that's been passed down from generation to generation. And she gets all the ingredients, and she's reading through the recipe, and she notices something weird because at the bottom of the recipe, it says to cut the end off of the roast before you put it in the oven. Now, she thinks that is very, very odd. So she calls up her mom and she says, Mom, I've got the family recipe to make the roast, and it says to cut the end off. Why do you do that? And her mom says, well, that's the way my mom taught me. Why don't you call up your grandma and ask her? So she calls up her grandma. She says the same old thing, same thing about the end off the roast. And her grandma says, well, that's how I learned it from my mom. Why don't you call her up? So her great-grandmother's 93, still alive, has all her faculties about her. So she calls her up and she explains the whole thing. She talked to her mom, she talked to her grandma. Now I'm calling you. Why'd you cut the end off the roast? So there's this long pause, and her great-grandmother says, we had a small oven. That's it, right? And it's so the idea is that so many organizations suffer from small oven thinking, and so do so many leaders. The fact is, so why do we lead the way we do? Like you said, Chris, it's because that's the way our leaders taught us, either consciously or more likely unconsciously through their behaviors. And so what a lot of us are living out is what I call the inherited leadership legacy of previous generations. And if you look back to the history of leadership, which I did, and I did all this research on, it's fascinating because where it was born was in the dawn of the industrial age. And realizing then 95% of the employee workforce was all doing repetitive manual labor in a factory, where literally it was thought of management was the brains and labor was the bronze. So in other words, if I'm the manager, my job is to tell you what to do, and your job is just to shut up and do it. So that's where command and control came from, because it was all about doing the same consistent, repetitive, day in, day out thing all the time. Well, clearly, that's not the world that we live in anymore. But unfortunately, too many of us are still holding on to a lot of those vestiges of command and control style leadership, even though rationally we know that really isn't the best way to do it. Frankly, in the moment, it's quicker. And if we don't really think about it, it seems easier, right? Because I can just say, well, just do this because I say so. It's kind of like, because I'm the daddy, that's why. Or I'm your boss, that's why, right? So we default to those tendencies. But what we don't realize is how in that moment, we actually push people away. And that while at best we might be getting their compliance in the moment, what we're not getting is their engagement and their commitment.
Right. So you're going against all of those three keys to being a great leader or effective leader. You're not having people collaborate because you have all the answers, and the communication is shut down because they're not going to share with you. And certainly you're not connecting with them because I guess you're just not even connected with yourself or the why behind what you're doing. So how could you even extend past what's already in you? How do we recognize that that's what we're doing? Because we have good reasons, quote unquote, for the things that we're doing, and we should certainly justify them or prove through, maybe some metric that this is working. So how do we go into examine like, whoa, maybe this part of my leadership is something that doesn't make sense, that needs to change?
Well, Chris, you've just asked the $64,000 question. Like, what do we do? Which is, I think this is the first step on the path to real leadership development, which is the willingness to hold up the mirror and take a look at yourself and go, you know what? I'm not perfect. And getting both feedback from yourself, starting some self-awareness of what could you be doing differently? What could you be doing better? Also what works well as getting feedback from those people around you. Just like we said earlier, the surveys are confidential. Are you creating an environment of trust as a leader where people will give you the good and the bad and the ugly so that you can start to do something about it? Because otherwise you're living in denial and you're not going to really grow. So the first step very much is the willingness to have some self-awareness and to recognize there's a big gap between your intentions and the impact. So start working on that. And the way to find out is by asking people who will tell you the truth.
Yeah, that's a hard proposition too. In that, it seems like you would need to build up almost a culture where that becomes the norm before people actually become candid with you.
Exactly. And I think that usually people only step onto that path of self-awareness after they've seen somebody else model it for them, because it's a really hard thing to understand. Like, oh, I should do that. But if you've never seen it done, like, how do I do that? Where? And do I have even the skills to do that? Because the tendency, for example, for many people, and I coach lots of leaders around this, is when people start giving them less than perfect feedback, is to want to justify, wait, you don't understand. Wait. No. And it's like, no, the goal when someone gives you feedback is to take it in, and you get 2 words. Thank you. That's it. You get to respond with thank you, and just take that in. And then whether you use it or not, that's up to you. But I'll just give you an example from my own life. It's not a pretty one, but it's real, is I got some, and I was a very hard charger, like achievement driven person, but I asked for some feedback, and sometimes I got it unsolicited. But I remember getting feedback consistently that, hey, Alain, when you're really focused, is that you can tend to steamroll over people. And when you're like that, you're really kind of difficult to be around. Well, the first person tells me that. I'm like, oh, that's just them. Well, the second person, what do they know? By the 8th and 9th person, it starts to, the law of large numbers starts to kick in. It's like, okay, 9 against 1. Maybe something I'm doing isn't working here. And that was really a wake-up call for me. It's like realizing, you know what? I am actually really care about people. And the idea that I was literally having people in tears who didn't want to work on my project teams was a wake-up call. It's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly not what I want to do. So I need to change. And that, and sometimes we don't change until we get those wake-up calls. And sometimes we get the wake-up calls and we hit the snooze button. So the challenge for us is to hear the wake-up calls and then to start doing something about them. And frankly, I think right now, in the middle of this pandemic, this is a global wake-up call in a lot of ways, because I think many of us are questioning our values, our beliefs, our legacies, because, life and death is staring at us in the face in a way it usually doesn't. So I think in some ways, as leaders, this is a great opportunity to step back and consider our own leadership style and take stock of what's working and what do we want to improve on moving forward, both through the pandemic and post-pandemic.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And people are going to be way more sensitive and are more sensitive to empathy. And we see so many people reaching out to their neighbors and their small businesses, and just ways that they haven't before. They've allowed themselves to become more vulnerable. And if organizations don't follow suit with what the average person is really experiencing in this, then these organizations are sort of reflections of what people value in themselves too, and they can resonate with. And so, it seems like you had suffered from similar things like that I've suffered from as a coffee trainer early on in my career. I had a 4-page, very well-written complaint against me by somebody who I was trading, and I kept it. And I think I still have it 20 years later as a reminder of a tendency that I might have in a position of power as a leader to do that very thing, to like steamroll people, to close off the empathy, to really put myself in somebody else's position and understand that. And you speak a lot about empathy, and it seems like one of the keys to achieve those 3 things in leadership. So in leadership, it seems like a given, but what is the benefit of empathy in leadership? And without it, what are we kind of leaving on the table?
Yeah, this is a huge, huge topic. And obviously, like you're saying, particularly relevant now. So first, I want to start by defining what I think empathy is. Real simple definition, which is basically showing people that you understand them and that you care how they feel. And why it's so critically important is because, look, whether you're in the coffee business or really any industry, you're in the people business. That's what makes everything work. And so if we think about what leadership at its core is, leadership's a relationship between 2 people, a leader and someone who chooses to follow. And the quality of that relationship is based on the quality of connection between those 2. And so the question as a leader is, what do I do to improve the quality of connection? Well, that's exactly where empathy comes in, because empathy is the most basic human of impulses. Is that, when someone cries out, like when we hear a baby cry, there's an impulse in us to reach out and help. We are hardwired to be empathic. The only problem is we're not hardwired to be empathic with everyone. Only the people that are within what I'll call our empathy circle make the cut. So family, close friends, loved ones who we already feel connected to, we naturally feel empathy to. might be harder with strangers, or if we see our workers as just worker bees or employees who just have a job to do, we don't necessarily feel that same natural level of empathic connection. And so taking the time to understand that other people have situations that deserve empathy is a really useful one. I'll share a story that really brought this to life for me. So I was working with a group of leaders, and we were discussing the subject of beliefs, talking about how beliefs shape mindset and mindset shapes behavior. So I said to the group, we're talking about the fact that beliefs can change over time. So I asked them all this question, and I'd asked the same question to many groups before, which was, okay, so beliefs can change, right? So is there something that you once believed that you no longer believe? Well, usually when I ask that question, you can imagine, Chris, the answers I get are things like Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy, right? It's like, oh yeah, I once believed that. I don't believe it anymore. So beliefs can change. So I'm expecting someone to say Santa or the Tooth Fairy. But this guy, Glenn, in the front of the room, raises his hand and he says, oh yeah, something I once believed that I no longer believe. That's an easy one. I never really liked people a whole lot. I thought, wait, where's this guy going, right? He said, yeah, at work, I guess you could call me a real SOB. And all I cared about was that people hit their numbers, and that was really their job. And I thought, okay, this guy's about to completely derail my training here. But then suddenly Glenn shifted because he said, but all that changed 2 years ago because my wife was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, and people out of the woodwork just started showing up and helping, doing pickups and drop-offs for my kids, making meals, and it completely restored my faith in humanity. And I realized that the people on my team at work, well, they had families too. They had lives too. So I started asking them, and instead of talking at them, I started talking with them. And I built some relationships since then, and I like to think I'm not the same SOB I used to be. So from that story, Chris, I think what we get from that is the secret sauce that transformed Glenn was first receiving empathy from others and then being able to give it. And I think for us as leaders, it's so easy to kind of default to task mode. Like we've got a job to do, we've got things to get done, we've got numbers to achieve, results to get, sales to make. But realizing the sales only come because people are creating relationships where people want to buy, right? The numbers only get hit because someone's achieving those numbers. And so I always coach leaders, put relationships before task. And the best way to start relationships is with empathy.
That's great. In the book, you have a quote of focus on the people because the people make the numbers, and it seems like two sides of the same coin to say you have these relationships, and these relationships exist and they can be sustained because the business is in business and is, profiting and growing, and by virtue of that, growing its ability to create relationships. But what I hear you saying is that at the core of it, the thing that you tend to first is not the metrics necessarily. It's what produces it. It's the goose, not the golden egg, right?
Exactly. And so it's not a question of do you choose one over the other, because that becomes that kind of binary black and white thinking. Like one, no, it's not. It's a question of priorities. It's just, and remembering to come back to the people first, much in the same way if you're in a marriage. I don't think you could get away after 15 years of marriage and saying, I said I love you on the wedding day. Isn't that enough? You have to hear it again. The fact is, humans, we need to stay in connection. Connection isn't I'm on and then I stay on. So I think what we're talking about empathy is we can't take relationships for granted, is that they need to be nurtured and tended to over time. And so showing empathy on a consistent basis is a way for you to strengthen those connections.
I imagine that you would eventually, as it becomes part of the culture, it provides its own momentum where it's easier to do these things. Because if you're just starting from zero and realize, for example, you hold the mirror up to yourself and say, well, I am that SOB and I need to change. Getting that flywheel in motion is a pretty difficult thing at first, but would you say it becomes easier as you build up systems and a culture around it to accomplish these things more as habit rather than just force of will?
Absolutely, it becomes easier. The idea is that empathy, like I said, we're hardwired for it, and it can be strengthened like any other muscle. There are skills and there are tools that you can use in the book. I think I read about 6 of them. And happy to share some of those now too, just in terms of there are specific practices that we can do to strengthen our empathy muscles. And when you start doing them, guess what? They get easier, like anything else you practice. And I'll just share a few of those. I mean, one, for example, and I think this might be the keystone habit, which is really important in everything around leadership, but particularly around empathy, which is to listen with purpose. And when I say listen with purpose, that's a very kind of different listening than just listening till the other person finishes talking so you can tell them what to do or giving them advice, right? Listening with purpose is really holding space for them to express themselves and have their own perspective without you doing anything else. And that actually at the beginning can be really, really exhausting if you're not used to it, because it isn't about jumping into problem solving and fix it mode. It's just allowing people to have that. Because actually, most people don't want fixers. They don't want someone to come in and have to solve their problems. Most people actually would prefer to solve their own problems, and they want to actually have a sounding board, which we can provide as leaders to, first of all, understand where they're coming from, understand how they feel, and then suddenly when they have that, and there's neuroscience behind this too, it actually relaxes their central nervous system so that basically their prefrontal cortex or their thinking brain gets back online. Because the fact is, and we all have experienced this, is that when we are in panic mode, highly emotional, is we don't think straight. I mean, that's probably happening to a lot of us on a daily basis right now in the middle of this pandemic. And so as leaders, to kind of give people that space or that psychological safety so they can step into solving their own problems. And yeah, you can be there to coach and guide and offer things, but that shouldn't be your go-to strategy. So listening with purpose is definitely a top behavior to do. And another thing that goes along with that as well is the idea of cultivating curiosity. I mean, I think the best leaders that I know are extremely curious. They don't try to lead with this know-it-all attitude. In fact, they're the opposite. They're more of a learn-it-all because they want to understand what people are thinking and where they come from. Because what we find is, I'm sure you've heard the expression that none of us is as smart as all of us. Mm-hmm. And so realizing as the leader, particularly in this world today where we all have access, with a laptop and an internet connection, we all have access to information. And so we're no longer these keepers and repositories of all the golden information. In fact, it's everywhere. And our people have great information. Like our people know about our customers better than we do. What are we doing? So they share that information. So our role as leaders needs to be less about commanding and controlling and much more about facilitating the flow of information from where it is to where it needs to be, and then taking the appropriate action to help us move our business and our team forward. So there's a couple of examples of what you can do to strengthen your empathy muscles by listening with purpose and cultivating curiosity.
Well, it makes perfect sense that if you don't feel safe, you were talking in the beginning about that power dynamic between the boss and the employee. And if you don't feel safe, you're just going to be concerned with your survival, and you're not going to be creative. And I've maybe said this on the show a couple times, but I like to say to my son when he's 6 years old and he's having a meltdown about something that I, in my infinite 41-year-old wisdom, know is not a big deal. I tell him that you cannot be creative or think of creative solutions, at least when you're angry. And so work on getting him out of that, that fright and that flight and that just that amygdala hijack of where he's at. It's so that we can come up with a solution and train him to be in that space. And it's kind of my job to provide that platform for him. It seems that with leadership, you have to cultivate a platform that allows for people to feel the safety to be creative, so that when you're putting together some collaborative project, that you would actually have people contributing to it, instead of it just being silence.
Oh, completely, Chris. I love what you just said there about as the leader kind of putting together that platform, because from my point of view, and this is really, and you mentioned collaboration as well, I think in some ways that is the main job of the leader, is to design the platform or the environment for people to thrive. And so understanding what are the needs that people have to be met in order for them to thrive. And so those are the seeds you want to plant in the environment. And when they're present, people will thrive. And if they're not present, people will wither. So, we talked about one already, safety, right? And so safety could be physical safety, which is why we're all staying at home right now, for example. It's also psychological safety. So, for example, do people feel safe to speak up whether it's one-on-one or in a team meeting. So there's safety. And another need that people have is the need for energy, is that there are things that we can do that will raise the energeticness, or that's a new word, energeticness, energize the team. Yeah, sure, why not? Energize the team. Yeah. So how are we going to energize the team? So there's specific things that we can do to help grow their energy. Then people have a need for purpose, the sense that what they do matters and that people want to contribute to something greater than themselves. So what can we do as leaders to design an environment that's going to foster that need for purpose to get that need met? And then finally, the need for ownership. People want to take responsibility and be autonomous and have some freedom in how they do their work and some creativity in that. So there are definitely things that we can do, skills that we can introduce into the environment that suddenly people get those needs met. And obviously the art of leadership is that not everyone wants all those needs to the same level as other people. Some people are really keen on safety and security. Other people want lots of opportunities to grow and get out of their comfort zone. So there's not a one size fits all, which is why I think there's, a million leadership books out there now.
Well, yeah, exactly. And then in treating people not as a monolith, but as individuals. This is one of the reasons why mutual friend Bruce Tulgan, a guest on the show a couple of times, advocates so strongly for one-on-ones and high structured substantive meetings, because we do, out of our own sense, I guess, of safety as managers or leaders, we are operating in a similar way where to protect ourselves, we have to, or we think we have to, categorize people broadly so that it makes our job easier, because maybe we're not being given the platform as a manager by the owner to thrive. And so now we're having to take up more than we did before. I mean, how do we break ourselves out of that cycle where we want to allow people to break out of their, sense of, this isn't safe, and provide for them, but at the same time, as a leader, we might not be having that provided for us and have to, provide our own safety or just operate out of fear.
Yeah, you bring up the great point, like that middle kind of between a rock and a hard place that a lot of mid-level managers feel. And so, the challenge there, because if you're in that situation and if you're not getting what you need from your immediate supervisor, whatever level that might be, it's much more challenging to be able to kind of provide that to the people that you lead because you're not getting it yourself. This is where I think the challenge of the difficult conversation is are you willing to have those conversations? And from my experience and having coached people around this too, is, the best way to have those difficult conversations is to find where is there mutual alignment. So instead of kind of, it's never a great way to come in saying, I'm trying to do this and you're messing me up, right? That's just being oppositional doesn't really get you very far. So instead, thinking about, obviously your immediate supervisor wants your team to thrive and succeed, because if they succeed, then they're hitting their numbers. Like, we can be very metric for a moment, right? If they're succeeding, they're hitting their numbers. And if they do that, then you are, and then they are, right? So basically it's going to help them do their job and look good. So if you can start with that common alignment and say, hey, can I talk to you? And I want to talk to you about the impact. So instead of making it about their behavior and about them, instead framing the conversation about how your team is struggling. And here are some things that would help me. And directly, helping me looks like, and then you can suddenly bring out your wish list of things to talk about. But then suddenly it's been depersonalized, and it's much more about the business and the organization and how we have to collaborate to make this happen. So again, easier in theory than in practice, but that's
Yes.
the work. That's the work of leadership. I like to say that, as leaders, we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Right. And some of the motivation that we have to do this might come from having received less than stellar leadership from the past. So we do want to, set up, if you're a mid-level manager who all of a sudden becomes the go-to person, like the operations manager or somebody like that, then it seems like you'd be more motivated by a sense of empathy, having experienced that yourself, to set up that platform for those who you're charged with leading.
Yeah, completely. And I think one of the things, and you mentioned about this kind of our own inherited history, most of us haven't had the modeling of someone coming to us and offering honest feedback upwards. And I think oftentimes because of the power plays that exist in organizations, we get scared. And we also suddenly shut down and we make all sorts of assumptions about, oh, if I share this, nothing's going to change. Like, we actually shoot ourselves in the foot before we get started. And so it's really considering what are strategies we can take to start to create an open dialogue. And yes, in an ideal world, we'd all have enlightened leaders and bosses who think that we're great and they model the way. But sometimes it's up to us to step forward and to initiate the conversation. And when we do, it's much more, it's sometimes amazingly surprising, the results you'll get. So I would encourage all the listeners to, if you're thinking about it, go for it. Because if you don't, you're sort of stuck with that, nothing's going to change. And then you're just kind of biding your time until when. So it's really kind of, this is why I think creating or clarifying your own values is so important, because otherwise you sort of just get stuck in, okay, this is just the job and I'm writing it out. And then ultimately you're just coming to work for the paycheck. And that's really demoralizing.
It's amazing how when you are the first one to bring it up, you find that there are a lot of people who have similar thoughts. And the fact that we are all human beings and we're all connected, we all have similar desires, works in our favor if we need the courage to be the first to, broach the topic in our organization that, if there's a dysfunction that you want to address, then probably a lot of people want to as well. And, it just takes one person to do that. And so that's, it seems like a reality that I've seen at play before. When we're talking about these concepts and strategies for becoming more connected and more collaborative and communicating, I wonder how this all plays into the relationship between the staff who are on the front lines of the business and the customer who interacts with them, because so much of our vision casting and strategy comes from offices and then trickles down into the day-to-day, and we hope that it translates. But how does all this translate to improving the relationship between the business and specifically the workers and the customer? And how does that really prove effective leadership?
Oh, sure. Well, there's been all sorts of research just around, when employee engagement goes up, that the last studies I saw from Gallup was that, highly engaged employee organizations are 21% more profitable than those that are not. I mean, so just right there. And so obviously, if we look at employee engagement, there's a correlation and a causation into customer satisfaction. And that's because when you're engaged and enthused, you bring that spark with you. I think we all know, and there's all sorts of science that I won't go into right now with this, but that emotions are contagious. And so as leaders, not only on the emotional level of, are you in a good mood and are you sharing the mood, but also do we create clear systems and processes, and giving our frontline staff, do they have the tools to do their job as well as they can, as opposed to trying to keep things running with Band-Aids, duct tape, and string? I think one of the things, I use this analogy a lot with leaders. If you think about a pendulum, let's say you're holding something like a piece of string in your hand, and at the bottom is a rock, like a little pendulum. So all it takes is a little bit of motion side to side at the top, and pretty soon the bottom of that pendulum is going to swing back and forth. Well, organizations are no different. So we have to recognize that at the top, the highest levels of leadership, all they have to do is be off course just a little bit and be misaligned and be confused and not clear on what we're trying to do. And then everyone at the front lines, way at the bottom, is like that rock who's just swinging wildly, going, what am I supposed, how does this work? And there's this confusion. And obviously, when people are operating with such confusion and lack of clarity, no one can perform at their best. So we want to try to make things as simple and as effective as possible for our front lines. And that's obviously through connection, clear communication, and fostering this environment of collaboration so that they can basically be in that environment, show up, and they're ready to serve. Because if we are so busy throwing obstacles in their way, the customer just becomes another thing to have to deal with, as opposed to actually, no, the customer's why we're all here. The customer is the one that is fueling and funding this entire enterprise. And so how can we serve them, as well as how can we serve the bigger mission or purpose of why we're actually in business in the first place?
Well, that's so critical. And you touch on such a great point that we've got so many systems in the back office of our point of sale systems to show us the the numbers, and people become numbers. And often managers will send a post out on Slack and congratulating all the staff on a record day, and it will be attached to numbers. And so the reinforcement is that the people that you served are, in fact, numbers and not people. And it seems like we would need to wean ourselves away or be a little bit more self-reflective of the fact that we've allowed metrics to replace humanity. And when we take in what you suggest in the book and in this conversation and put it into practice, like even in management and ownership, you can be more connected with your customers themselves. So the business is actually going to make decisions that benefit the customer, which is, for my industry, incredibly important right now, because we have to serve the needs that people have in this moment, not the ones that we wish they had or that we could have maybe forced before, but we have to be very empathetic in this moment. And numbers just don't give us that kind of feedback.
Exactly. And so that's the work, that's the human work of leadership, is to translate those numbers. Because look, we need numbers because numbers are objective and they're fixed and they give us good measurements of where we are and where we need to go. And that's not the whole picture. Is then how do we retranslate those numbers back into people, back into purpose? And so, for example, it's really one thing to do is potentially let's bring in some customers and share some stories about how what we do impacts them. You know, there was a great study that was done by Adam Grant at Wharton, and he's also written a couple of books about this too. He's where basically they had a bunch of, I think it was the University of Pennsylvania, they had a bunch of students doing fundraising to raise money for scholarships, and they were calling up alumni. And so they were going along, they were measuring how much money they were raising. But then what they did is they actually brought in some of the students that were being helped by the scholarships for the money they were being raised. And they got to hear the stories firsthand. And then they measured their fundraising efforts after they met the students. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but the fundraising totals just went through the roof because suddenly people had that personal connection to why am I doing what we do? So again, we want to translate out of numbers into people to remind people of the sense of purpose because, you know, at the end of the day, we're working with flesh and blood people who are dealing with issues just the way we are. And again, this pandemic has just brought that sense, our shared humanity and our commonality right up to the surface. Like if it was missing before, you know, empathy alert, it's here now. So yeah.
Exactly. And you brought up a great point also about the chaos that can happen in the day-to-day operations if it's not really if you're not on top of your systems and providing a place where people are provided for to do their jobs well. Then there's no room for them to connect with a customer. In fact, the customer when a customer shows up, and I think every barista knows this feeling, when the customer shows up and they're having a hard time with a system that is not set up for their success, that customer simply represents another hammer blow to drive them deeper into the dysfunction than they already were before. So it's not fair to either one of them.
Oh, totally. It reminded me, there's a great quote I have in the book too from Edwards Deming. He's a management theorist who said, you put a good person in a bad system and the bad system will win every time. And this is exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, indeed. So as we look to apply some of these things in our organizations, I wonder, what are some of the first steps that we can do to really create these platforms like let's coffee shops, our audience here at Keys to the Shop. We are going to be looking at reopening in some capacity in the future. And in this time, we've got some reflecting to do. And we've certainly done maybe a lot of that right now. So if we're going to create a strategy and plan to level up the leadership and create that connection, collaboration, and communication, then what would you suggest we start with and prioritize?
Great. Well, I would start with connection. I would always start with connection because that's the human factor. And I think right now, you know, as we think about kind of where we are with our coffee shops, is thinking through, first of all, are we connecting with our customers in the community? And how are we doing so? Are we starting from the point of view of how can we be of help? How can we be of service? Because right now we know that we will be remembered for how we acted during this time. And you won't stay the same. You'll either be raised in someone's esteem or lowered, but you won't stay the same. I was just having a conversation with a client a little while ago today, and they were saying how there's a restaurant in their community that has just gone above and beyond. It's like making free meals and stuff to everyone. And they said, oh my gosh, I am a total champion. I want to go there all the time now, right? So the first thing is looking at how do we connect with our customers, and then looking at how do we connect with our employees. And also, first of all, this checking in. And I realize that for some of us, it's when I say connecting, it isn't that, some of us might be completely closed and, we've had to lay people off. That doesn't mean we can't care about them. So whatever the situation is do you connect from that human factor, is realizing how do you deal with people with respect and care and listening and concern, no matter what the external situations are. And in those conversations with customers and employees, you don't have to, as a leader, you don't have to have all the solutions. So if there are business challenges, either currently with how you're running things now, or as you think about reopening, start asking this, what do you think we can do? And start to ask your customers, ask your employees, because people love to feel like their input is being listened to and built on. And so they may have the same answers as you would come up with, but because it came from them, they'll be so much more invested and take ownership of the future success. So I would definitely start with connection, and then starting to build those two-way dialogues to start to create solutions. So this is also a great time right now because things are sort of on pause. I like to say so many sacred cows have been slaughtered in the last month or two. Mm-hmm. And so this is a great time to really rethink your processes, your systems, really your whole organization, and go, why do we do things the way we do? And should we be doing them better? Are there stupid rules that we should kill? Are there dumb meetings that we're having? Are there stupid reports that we're creating? And this is the time to change and rethink that stuff, because we don't have to keep the engine running at the same, we're not going and going. So this is a wonderful time to be reinventing and innovating in new ways. So I'd say that if you did those two things right there and continued to communicate that stuff, that would be a great project for right now.
Well, yeah, indeed. Time to update the recipe to the roast.
Exactly. Get a larger pan.
Exactly. Yeah. Alain, thank you for this time. I really enjoyed this conversation. It spoke to so many different things that I see coffee shops both doing and needing. And whether it's a coffee shop or a large organization, business is business and people are people. And this stuff is so powerful. And I really thank you for writing the book, coming on the show. How can we stay in touch with you, purchase this book, and learn more?
Sure. The easiest place to go for that, Chris, would be to the book's website, which is www.crackingtheleadershipcode.com. And right on that, you can learn all about the book. You can order it from that page, as well as you can download the first chapter to get a preview of what the book is all about. And that page actually links to the rest of my website, where you can see the other work I do. I obviously work with organizations doing speaking and coaching and consulting, either individuals and groups, on all about helping leaders to become better. So that's probably the easiest place that people can find me. And I want to thank you too, Chris. This has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and with your audience.
Well, I hope that you all really enjoyed that episode, and I really hope that as you are listening, it brought up for you specific areas that you can remember or recognize as in need of more connection, communication, and collaboration with your team and even with your customers. As we talked in this conversation, Alain has provided such a great service in this book, in this conversation, and open up feedback from our team and become more self-aware. This is something that we constantly need to be doing, and focusing on better connection, communication, and collaboration is so critical to that. I would really encourage you to go out and buy this book. You can do that on Amazon, and you can also find more information about what Alain does, his speaking, training, and blog over at alainhunkins.com. You can also go right to the website crackingtheleadershipcode.com, and you'll find a link for that in the show notes to this episode. Big thank you to Alain for joining us today. It was such an honor to have you. You truly added some great insights to the Keys to the Shop community today. Thank you so much. Now, if you want to get in contact with me for any reason, you can do so by emailing chris@keystotheshop.com. Any kind of feedback or suggestions, communication of any kind, just That's the email, chris@keystotheshop.com. And don't forget, Keys to the Shop Consulting is offering a very deep discount on normal hourly rate for consulting over the phone. And these are really fantastic opportunities to just sit down and clarify some things for you, to really help you work through some problems with your business, brainstorm ideas to bring in more sales and profit to your business. Anything is on the table, really. So if you're in a place where you feel like having some regular conversations set up with Keys to the Shop Consulting would help you in your business, then reach out to me, chris@keystotheshop.com. I would love to figure out how I can help you thrive, especially now. And so with that, it is the end of our episode. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have an awesome week, and especially I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.